My road to the White House was quite circuitous. It was never a plan. I ended up working for Mayor Daley way back, starting in 1989 when he was first elected, and met then Michelle Robinson then, and we became friends and colleagues, and I hired her in 2001 and was her boss. And then when the president won the election, she asked if I would join her. So there's been a role reversal, so I went from being her boss to her being my boss. And no matter what, I think she and I will always be sort of friends and mutual advisors. One of the most interesting things I did when I worked in the White House was took on a role as being the liaison with the Jewish community. And it was something I started off doing temporarily, but it was such a labor of love that I kept it and loved doing it even when I went over to the East Wing to work for Mrs. Obama. There are many constituent groups, and one of the things that I learned was that there's really no area where, just like doing liaison with the African American community, there's not a monolithic, African American community with one view. And it's certainly true of the Jewish community. So I learned a tremendous amount, and what made it particularly interesting is that a lot of the Jewish groups were interested in domestic issues like healthcare reform, don't ask, don't tell, whereas others were primarily focused on the Middle East and issues involving Israel. So it was such a range of issues that were covered, and getting to be sort of the ambassador, interpreter of administrative positions to the Jewish community was something that was incredibly rewarding for me. I think that both the president and the first lady come to the issue, first of all, as sons and daughters. I think the president has talked about how his mother's illness made an impact on him, and certainly for the First Lady, having a father who died very young of MS. But in addition, the First Lady worked at a hospital, an inner city hospital, University of Chicago Medical Center, and learned about what it is like and what are the consequences both for the individual and the healthcare system if you are in a position where you don't have primary care, you don't have routine checkups, you don't have a physician who's your own. So I think they both come to it both personally, and then for the president, his feeling of accomplishment, that wasn't just about winning an election, but it was about getting coverage for millions of people, that this is something that if he did nothing else, he'd be able to say he had accomplished for the American people. When you think about healthcare going forward, I think passing healthcare legislation obviously was a major accomplishment, but there is no legislation that is perfect. I think the president has made clear that he is open to suggestions as long as whatever happens doesn't add to the deficit, and it doesn't cover fewer people. So, and that people still get kind of the routine coverage that they need to so that if they have pre-existing conditions, for example, that they don't lose their coverage. And I think it's very difficult because states right now are in incredible financial binds, and the sort of easy thing to do is to simply cut Medicaid, cut coverage for poor people. But that doesn't really help, because ultimately having people uninsured and showing up in emergency rooms doesn't save hospitals money, it doesn't save the country money, and we all pay for it one way or another. So I think what he's trying to do is listen to suggestions, particularly businesses also who are hard hit, and come up with some flexibility through some waiver programs so that going forward there's hopefully some real progress in kind of getting people together and solving this. Being the Chief of Staff to First Lady Michelle Obama has been an incredible experience for me, the best job I think I will ever have. And One of the things that's a challenge and also great about it is that as a chief of staff, there is no issue that is not your responsibility. So the First Lady couldn't and shouldn't be everywhere, but was very interested in what was going on, and needed to be, sort of up to speed on things. So I was her eyes and ears in the West Wing, her representative in the West Wing, and also worked on, scheduling in advance and communications, and what we call crisis management was certainly a major part of my day. So on any given day, what I thought the day would be like going in almost always had nothing to do with what the day actually was like, because one would schedule meetings, but things would happen. And so there was a lot of kind of troubleshooting, crisis management. I think the most challenging job as chief of staff was not running the East Wing, but working with the West Wing, in that inherently there are tensions, because the East Wing, the First Lady's office, one of the luxuries is you get to choose the issues that you work on, whereas the president doesn't have that luxury. When something happens in Egypt or Libya, obviously other things have to wait. So we in the East Wing would be planners, and we would think a week ahead, 3 months ahead, whereas our colleagues in the West Wing, who had an incredible amount to offer, were often not able to focus on things moving ahead, but on things happening that moment. So there was always that tension. Another wonderful opportunity I had was to work for 8 years for Mayor Daley in Chicago. And it surprises me how relevant that experience it was for me in terms of working in the federal government. And one of the things that Mayor Daley always emphasized was that some of the not necessarily global issues, but the kinds of things that really affect people's lives happen at the local level, whether it's obviously crime, the education system, but even issues like graffiti, which really affect communities and how they think about themselves. And I think that having that background and then applying it in the federal government, where sometimes there's a tendency to think about one size fits all, where at the local level I think there's a real appreciation of the differences among communities and some sort of different answers to some of the similar problems. When I think about the issues that the First Lady has been most involved in, some of them, like service, is something that she's been involved in her whole life, giving back. On the campaign, she met a lot of military families and decided that that would be an important platform for her to let most Americans know about the sacrifices and the work that military families are doing and the ways in which they need our help. With respect to childhood obesity, I think the First Lady started off coming to the issue really as a mother and thinking that parents really need help just getting the information that will help them raise healthy children. And I think it started literally in the White House with a garden, and then now there's this national conversation. And she's well aware of the fact that this is the first generation where our children may not be as healthy as the parents are, and it's a concerning fact, and something I think she's going to devote, no matter where she is, a lot of time to that issue. In terms of the White House as a residence, when you think about what it's like to raise children kind of above the store, one of the nice things about it is the president's commute is about 90 seconds, and that's lovely because he gets to have dinner with his family every night. But on the other hand, if the girls want to go outside and walk the dog or ride their bikes, there may be reporters there who are there for a press conference. There may be world leaders there, and it's a very odd situation. So even just within the residence, the First Lady has been focused on finding zones of privacy so that those girls can be raised in sort of as normal a situation as possible. I think they they are very much in their own world, in their own, with their own friends and school, and I think that they have adjusted incredibly well. But even when you think about just moving there, there hadn't been small children there for a long time. So even just making it into a home which is appropriate for a family with two young girls took a bit of work in the beginning.